From 2018 through 2023, DurhamARCTIC has been educating 15 PhD students in 7 different disciplines: anthropology, archaeology, biosciences, geography, history, law, and psychology, joining disciplinary-specific learning with the interdisciplinary study of the Arctic region. The program culminated in a 10-day trip through the Norwegian, Finnish, and Swedish areas of Sapmi, along a route from Alta to Andenes. We learned about the region's rich heritage, from its prehistory to the recent past, and we learned about the controversies that continue to this day over preservation, interpretation, and repatriation.
So what we do now, that we've done for about 20 years now, is to actually treat the rock with alcohol to kill off the lichen and everything. So what's left is just the pure stone. The stone doesn't really take damage from the alcohol at all. So it's very, very clean, and the carvings are obviously very, very visible. Now this elk's head staff is actually found in the archaeology as well, not in Norway, but in Finland.
We learned about struggles over who gets to tell the stories that connect the past with the present.
This is obviously not a hunting device, indicating that the bear hunting was not necessarily done for sustenance, but maybe just it was sort of a ritual practice in one way or another. So again, indicating that the bear is sacred. We're going to see some other ideas around this as well.
So bear hunting was very special for Sami, very important, and the bear was a sacred animal. It was seen as almost half human, half animal. So before bear hunt, you would have to decide with the noiti, with the spiritual expert, who's gonna be the one actually killing the bear. Although there's multiple people in the hunt, men would be in the hunt.
We learned about how residents of the region are maintaining the livelihoods that have sustained them for centuries.
And when you are spinning, you are using the spinning wheel and make very tight when you are spinning and to get it very strong. And when you are
We learned how these skills are being passed on to new generations.
We call it hard doji, which means harder materials, like wood or silver or antlers and so on. So these are more of the software weaving, and then here we have the machine room for the harder materials.
And we tried, not always successfully, to figure out these skills for ourselves.
A really good memory as well to know like which ones make which.
Exactly. Because you have so many threads.
Yeah, different combinations.
In our spare time, we shared thoughts, friendship, and laughter.
No.
That was something else. That was something else.
There was athlete foot powder as well.
Yeah. I think let's move on.
off with the underwear.
We also held seminars where we drew on our experience and our research to reflect on what we were learning about the region.
Cold is something that can actually be different in different contexts, right? And I think this is important. Also reflecting on human, non-humans experiences of the cold, right? Because when we think about the cold, we think about how we perceive the cold. What about animals? What about non-sentient beings, right? What is the cold for them? We cannot say, but for sure.
The winter in Fairbanks stays, relatively steady at around -30 degrees, -40, and then they had one freezing rain event where the temperatures just shot up and everything was just coated with this ice that instantly froze to surfaces that were still at -40, and it was just a mess until like April when everything then melted again naturally, but it was chaos. And so was it cold in between the freezing rain event in December and April? Yeah, it went back down to -40, but that wasn't a sufficient amount of cold. It wasn't steady. There was this like freeze thaw that got interrupted in between, and even the guide who was saying about the preservation of the caving rock carvings rock art that were better preserved because when the snow is on them and they stay at really cold temperatures the whole winter, they don't get the freeze-thaw cycles all the time that disrupt them. And I think this cold that comes and goes is so much more problematic than a cold that either is there all the time or is not there ever. And I think the in-betweens of cycles of up and down of cold are really problematic. So this idea of how do we define the cold that we are saying we do or don't have a right to, right? What is that cold?
We used the opportunity to share our research with each other.
It was described in the 1950s, and it was in the Baltic, it was in Sweden, and it was in lab populations of fish. So it was in Atlantic salmon, but they were being held in a lab. And basically, due to some poor decision by someone who released some of those salmon into the rivers there, they then ended up invading a huge number of rivers in northern Norway.
What we're going to do today is we're going to walk up from what is the new centre. This has been built in the last 5 years. This is the new town hall called the Igloo. We'll come back to that this afternoon. We can talk more about it then. We're going to go up here and we're going to go through an old cemetery. And we're just going to take a little note of some of the graves, and we're going to be looking for one grave in particular. And then from there we're going to move into what is kind of the shopping district, and from there into the inkwell houses, which were built in sort of between 1920 and 1940. And about there I think we'll meet the fence line. Yes, so and this is LKAB. This is their headquarters here. That's that building is meant to be designed after the UN building in New York. Yes, I know. And they're very, they're not. They're the most humble, some say. But they at Christmas time they light that up and it says God Jul, which is Merry Christmas. You can see the entrance to the mine over there on the left by the red building. There's a sort of blue archway built into the side. Look, there's a truck in now. Yeah, so you go in there and then it's just tunnels circling around through the old ore body and the galleries stemming off of that. These are as you can see, this is the former open cast pit. And these are the slag heaps they've been sort of filling in the pit with.
We were doing a bunch of stuff in the field and then repeating the experiment here as like a lab experiment. But we were looking at mycorrhizal fungi, so the underground fungi, and so we have a plant in the middle.
So some ecopoetry that I've read is usually focusing on a more observation way and how it would be by being something else. How it would be if you are the soil of this land, how it would be to be a leaf that starts growing in the spring, and by the autumn it will be on top of the soil and start decomposing and then be the soil.
But mostly we reflected, together and individually, on what we'd learned about learning across disciplines, through dialogue, and through a field experience. We began our discussion on the final day by reflecting on our strongest memory from the trip.
I also thought of the drum because I felt that it followed us in many stops we did. And where I was expecting it the least, it was in Kiruna. And like Eric was like, can you guess what object is the handle of the door? And I was actually shocked that it was the shape of the drum. And I found it very poetic in a way. I didn't form a poem about it, but I found it very interesting how it was following us in our journey, and we followed it in a way in its journey by learning all the places it has been, even if it wasn't supposed to, in a way. And I was thinking that I found it a bit oxymoron that the lady said about the silent years of the drum, and then you have it in a silent place, and that it will never be played because it's sacred and displayed in a way. So in my perspective, it's still silent, and it's not gonna be fulfilled the purpose it was made for. It's still repatriated, but not maybe as it was intended to when it was made. That's my reading of it.
The Modern Art Museum in Karasjok, there was a piece that was it was like a whiteboard, but see-through with the poem in red pen with Norwegian on it, and a sewing machine behind with fabric in it. And that was one of the, I think I'm right in saying it was one of the activists who were protesting against the wind farm at Fosen, the occupation ministries in Oslo it was just spring. I'm right in thinking this was one of the protesters had made their gap for the first time to take down, especially and wear it. And I thought that was such a potent symbol of both a sort of ongoing resistance, but also kind of the cultural resonance of things that we might only see in museums, and sometimes we saw the people in Kiruna wearing their gaffies outside the church. But a lot of what we've interacted with have been museum spaces, to see that kind of art that really suggests kind of potent futures, I think. That really struck me. It was a particularly moving piece.
It was really interesting starting in Alta with the Alta Dam and the story of Friends of the Earth, and Kjell, and the stories that he shared with us when we went to UIT, and I think the bit that sort of stuck the most was finding out that he's never been up to the dam, because it was like just too painful to actually go and see it for himself. I think.
Yeah, mine is a bit of a meta memory. It's more immaterial than an actual memory that I have of a specific person that we met, but it's the voices of old people who, and I was thinking about it yesterday reading the program, but the voices of old people who narrated the region, narrated the place that we've been travelling in from the different perspectives. That goes back to something Phil said at the beginning of the trip that everybody talks about. I was almost, I think Phil, you said everybody has an agenda that we have to be conscious of. But beyond that agenda, beyond that, what they wanted us to get from what they were speaking about, I think just the voices of them speaking about regions that has shaped them and that continue to shape them, I think is a powerful memory to think about our relation between the people that we met, but also between the people and the place that we just travelled through, I guess, and the sense of a region is only made by the people and by the voices of those people that we were lucky to listen to and to engage with, I guess, and the knowledge that comes from that as well.
Like it kind of struck me with the drums. If you looked at the detail on the drum, the kind of centre is like a symbol for the sun, and then they've got lots of kind of gods on there, but then also the kind of spiritual relationship with animals and like reindeer and elk, and also in the cave painting we saw the elk and the bears, and how they said, you know, with some of those species they don't hunt them, they don't eat them because of that spiritual connectedness, and then also just in, I suppose also in their clothing, you know, that when we talked to the weavers, they talked about the kind of knowledge that you need and the specific plants that you might need to dye those threads blue, and the kind of difficulty in making that colour, and that's all that link with nature and how important nature is in the kind of Sami and the indigenous cultures, I suppose. Yeah.
I really loved all the knowledge. So 3 examples was the turf hut, the turf roof that they used turf from, he said, the swamps, because it preserves the pH, it's preserved better. And also the way they take the bark off so they don't actually cut, a bit like what Greta was saying. That was, and I think he said they cut it using an axe, not a saw, because it follows
yeah.
That was, it's just really interesting. And then also the looms and how much love and care they put into these woven objects. And it was just really nice to see how the craft works, because it's just so intricate, and it's just really nice to see all that knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's more of a maybe a meta thing again. For me, partly has been it's going to sound very humanities, but the contrasts of care. And I think we've seen so many instances where it's been so obviously clear how much care and love people have had for things. So whether it's that tiny little wool shop where everyone's probably vastly underpaid for the actual work that they do, but you can tell they love it and they teach other people and they want to share this passion and knowledge, or whether it's the amount of effort that goes into a piece of Sami jewellery that just to make it beautiful, and that sort of extra time and extra effort, but it's done. And you know, the time and effort put into splitting a piece of wood and doing it in a certain way. I think there's been so many, and even just staying here, like the amount of effort that the kind lady is putting into making sure that we're comfortable, that there's been so many small and large examples of huge amounts of care, and even socially within this group, people looking out for each other, people having all kinds of conversations, academic, non-academic, and so on. And I think that's partly then made it even more obvious when that care has been absent. And I think that was maybe partly something in Kiruna, is that it was quite utilitarian. That it was, okay, this is what you need to like live, and this is what, yeah, some people might think this is cool, so we'll put this there, but it didn't feel like there was a love in the new buildings that were constructed, and there was a sort of care of community, and the same as well with the hotel near the airbase. Like, it was a perfectly functional hotel, and I'm not too fussy about what colour the walls are, but it just didn't have that feel of love and care. It was kind of, how many beds can we ram into a room so we can sort of charge people, and yeah, even as well a little bit the space station, that in some ways I'm sure there are people who are, you know, care a lot about the projects that they're doing, but not so much care for the surrounding landscape beyond what's a good launch pad site compared to maybe where Sadie is or so on.
You know, the phrase that kept running through my head really all trip, actually, which is odd because I'd heard it so many times, but it had never sunken into me, was the line from Dreamland of where the banal meets the sublime. And as I say, I mean, I've heard that, I'm probably the second most of people who've watched Dreamland in this cabin here. And yeah, so I'd heard it kind of, who knows how many times, but yeah, it was like almost every day at some point I thought, yeah, where the banal meets the sublime, because that's such a profound way for, and this is again something I really emphasize with the undergraduates, that you know, so much of it is the kind of the everyday acts of violence and acts of sustenance and acts of rebellion and acts of preserving yourself that actually we all do all the time, and are quite almost, you know, the human condition or something, or just a part of culture. It's how culture makes itself. And yet, at the same time, there's some starkness, and it's so evident, but it's evident and it's good and it's bad and it's everything, that it becomes very hard sometimes to put into words, or to put into an image, or to put into a story. And so then you try working with objects, or you try working with narratives, or you try working with places or community, and all these things that we've engaged over the week. And yeah, and that's where the sublime part comes in. But of course the nature of the sublime is that it's very difficult to talk about. It's difficult to and so then, you know, the memories, the good and the bad, the trauma and the dreams all sort of rise to the surface at the same time. And that's actually a really dangerous thing to do when you're not in a community of care, for that to happen. And maybe I could use this to transition a bit to that next question of the value of field learning. You know, I think one, there's the obvious values in that you get to listen to the people, as it were, and you get to see with your own eyes and all that. But I think there's probably also something to when you can be in a community where you're caring for each other, because I know we've all had times where we've, been troubled on this trip, and I don't think anyone wanted to run away from that trouble. I could quote Donna Haraway here, but I won't. But okay, fine, I will. Well, we wanted to stay with the trouble, and we did. And because really you can't not quote Donna Haraway, right? So yeah. Anyway, that's sort of my thought. But yeah, maybe we should take it to because obviously these trips they're difficult. It's a lot of work put into this. It's not always possible. You need to have the connections and know who people are, and as Britt was saying, actually risk yourself a bit if you're an interlocutor. And of course it costs a lot of money too. So there's there are things that have to be justified and valued. Not that I'm trying to gather data for a grant proposal, just to be clear, but yeah, I would be curious, because I could hear the argument being made, given that there are, almost every place we visited has a website. There are YouTube videos of people, there's great, actually, the drum exhibition, there's a really nice online 3D video stuff of the drum, for instance. So, what are, in your mind, what are the benefits, or are there benefits to doing a trip like this as opposed to gathering knowledge some other way? I'm going to take the camera and point it at Greta.
I don't think there's any 3D rendering of Karuna that could do it justice. I mean, I think the fact that none of us could articulate what we were feeling, but the best word that we could use was like energy. You don't have to know anything about that place to feel the way we all felt in Kiruna. It was just there. It was an ambience that wasn't even, because it doesn't even look, I don't know, you see things that you could see in other places, right? Building sites, new buildings, old buildings, whatever, they're not new sites. It's not like you're seeing a rare animal or a wildlife that you've never seen before, you know what I mean? But there was that depth of hollowness that you can't replace that. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing I would say is the value of spending time together with people, and this has come up before, in people caring for each other, and I mean, to me that's just just priceless to me, being able to spend this time with other people, and I just feel like the kind of bonding that has happened in this group over the period of DurhamARCTIC, but I think intense events like this one solidify it. I mean, I don't think I've have that anywhere else. It's quite special, and I don't think a lot of other PhDs that I know who are not in this group have that. I think a lot of PhDs feel very lonely, and I think that's really difficult. And if we do want to really put it back to something that is measurable and fundable, is the productivity. The being in a happy place to do your research well requires investing not just in the classic whatever academic things, but in nurturing your capacity to be a good academic. And without being in a good place through opportunities like this, I don't think you can achieve that. Having the confidence to be creative, having the peace of mind to experiment, that's priceless to me.
No, follow on from Greta's. Yeah, I think what we were talking about earlier about how this has come at a great time, being at the end of DurhamARCTIC. Don't really want to say that, but and I think obviously, even though it would have been of value to all get together and all do a field trip together when we were initially starting, this has kind of just been a perfect way to, I don't know, coalesce everyone's PhD journeys. And one of the favourite things about this trip has been everybody's little contributions at different points along the way, even if that's just spontaneously going up on the bus and sharing a story about somewhere we've gone past, or like Denai sharing some poetry that relates to some of the museums we've just been to, and I don't think you can ever really get that. Well, you can't get that on if this had been online. Obviously, we also wouldn't have got to go to all these great places. But yeah, I don't think you can replace that kind of capacity to just spontaneously share knowledge and spontaneously share stories, and yeah, and I guess also just spark ideas about future research from the places that we've been, and places, and thinking about places you might want to take your own research. I think we've all spoken about Kiruna a lot, but honestly, Kiruna was the place I was most excited to go to, because Phil, we've all heard about it in presentations you've given, Eric, and just general conversation. But I don't think any of us were prepared for that. And actually seeing you get emotional as well, walking around, which was, like, unsurprisingly, will, I think, stick with all of us. And yeah, I don't think any of those things could be felt or shared in the same way if it wasn't this kind of setup. And honestly, I know it's probably been a nightmare herding all the reindeer the whole week, but we are all extremely grateful for the amount of organisation that's gone into it, because it's been amazing.
The relationship that comes with bodily presence here, and I think that kind of relation, especially for me, for example, in law, you can't understand the law of the place without being in that place, because the law comes from the place, the law comes from the country around you. So I think being here from a very, here I'm being in my very disciplinary silo here, but trying to use another drama art to describe my silo, to understanding this relationship between people and the place, to perhaps understand better the relationship between law, the environment, and the place as well. So I think there's value in being in the environment, so being in those places that we've been to, but also traveling through those places and having our bodies just move through Sapmi in a way that is almost reminiscent of what we've seen, of people moving through the place and not being settled. So journey that started in Alta and then ended here, but it's been, well, Steinar said 3,000 kilometers. Is that right? Yeah. So that's a long way to herd reindeers.
Sometimes when you're familiar with things in the abstract, there's nothing that really surprises you. I think the thing that surprised me the most, is in that just made me go, wow, I wasn't expecting that, was Bob sticking his walking pole down through the heat and hitting the ice, and the clonk as it hit it, and I was like, that was not what I was expecting at all. And like, there are other experiences that will stay with me in other ways, but just in the sense of kind of learning something new that I would never have expected out of the landscape. It was just like, wow, it was incredible. So I think, that moment of learning from people who see places in different ways and can reveal things to you is really special.
I think as well, a lot of the places we've been to, we could have been sat in our houses at home, online, having Zoom presentations and having much of the same information given across to us, but actually going to the places, walking around, it's not just kind of the information, but it's the physical buildings that will trigger a memory, and it's being able to think about that. Like the Sami Parliament, for example, the mural on the back of the wall, that's something I'll remember forever. Or I'll look at a picture and it'll bring back the memories of discussions that were going on in that building, but you wouldn't get that same context or depth of experience, I guess, from a Zoom presentation. And I think that's something we can't do.
I know there are other models, and some of you have been on other sort of field trippy kinds of things that have either been tied to a specific research agenda or have been tied to getting students to educate each other through a joint experience of a place. And in a certain way, that wasn't exactly what we were trying here. and somewhat that was, yeah, because of the timing. The idea was somehow share at a deeper level and use the place as a crutch, but also as a something that makes you think. And that's what I've been hearing, actually, in particular in the discussions of Kiruna and of the drum and of all the visits, really, is that they made you think, which gets back to what we were talking about this morning about what is valued in education. And, sadly, that's often not what's valued, is making you think. It's getting you to produce. And, but the truth is you can't produce without thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. There was one story that I think we heard a couple of times, which I was thinking about a little bit. And it was this idea of going to a place and spending a night there, for example, in a house. And if you slept well during that night, it kind of meant that you were welcome at that space. And I kind of, I don't know, I found that a bit strange thinking about it, because I know various people here have various issues with sleep, and I was like, well, what if you go to that place and the place is ready for you, but you just slept badly because you ate a bad dinner, or you know, like what if the bad night is
I won't sleep for a week in that place.
Yeah. There's more like gravy than the grave about you. Not Christmas Carol, come on.
But what if like the sleeping badly in the place comes from you, and that made me think, well, maybe it's kind of a two-sided thing, that maybe we need to be quiet and listen and be open and gentle to see if the space welcomes us. But at the same time, we need to be ready and prepare ourselves to enter that space. And it needs to kind of both need to be ready, so then we can get that feel for one another. And maybe that's been a little bit with this trip and with kind of DurhamARCTIC at this point as well, that it's a physical space, it's an interdisciplinary intellectual space and so on. But I think also all of us have been in some ways becoming prepared for this over the last 3 years, not only learning the intellectual information of our discipline, but learning each other's jargon, all learning to speak with a bit less jargon ourselves, like all this, yeah, there's kind of been this dual process of coming into this space and being quiet and listening to it and seeing whether it's ready for us and what we can learn from it, but also I think like has been said before, I don't think we could have done this trip at the start, because the space wouldn't be ready for us and we wouldn't be ready for the space.
Yes, yeah, it really took off, yeah, absolutely. Because when they managed to get the trade lines going, they take forward. Yeah. Yes, yeah, really took off, yeah. Because when they managed to get the trade lines going, yes, yeah, it really took off, yeah, absolutely. Because when they managed to get the trade lines going, they take 4 hours of people in. So that's how local. Yeah, that's right.
You know, here you are, and you are into handicraft. Even as we speak here, and like with Ida, she's a slam poet that was part of this new generation of really important political voices in Sápmi. And you know, when they occupied the ministry, they all started doing handicraft. That, you know, they was doing handicraft every day. And her first cacti was kind of, she had people helping her to make her first cacti. She was raised in Oslo, and kind of, and they were knitting. They were knitting in the ministry, they were knitting outside of the ministry, they were knitting when they were meeting the Prime Minister and, you know, all this other, and here you are knitting. And it's like, it is, yeah, how people come, how the world come together.
But I like the fact that I'm kind of like the little tiny reindeer at the back that somehow got scooped up into the herd. And now you've all been talking about, like, it was great that we're all so bonded and we've known each other for ages, and I'm just sitting thinking, yeah, absolutely. Thinking like no one knows just how to do that. I'm new. And I think that's really testament to the kind of thing that Rick was talking about, and about the ability that you all have as people working in the field / tourists, wherever you position yourself there for this trip, in terms of allowing the people that we're meeting and speaking to about their land and their culture, and letting them feel seen, I think, with Rick's phrase. And so I think that's the way to ensure that your field work isn't just another form of extraction, which we've been talking about a lot. And you could start to think that to get beneath the surface is an equivalent to kind of tunnelling for your fossil fuels, and so out you go into the field and you get what you need from the trip. And I have been so impressed with the way that all of you travel really thoughtfully and ethically, not just in the way that you would expect because you're, you know, research professionals, but just as a kind of attitude and a spirit towards life. I think everybody's very open to one another and open to the people that you've met. And I've really sensed in everyone that has been kind enough to share their knowledge with us that they've really spotted that in you all. And so many people have said it was nice to have a group like Christians, like to have a group that cared. And I think so much these days we're in this kind of attention economy, and so one of the most lovely sort of tributes you can give to somebody is to give them your attention. And I notice you all doing that wherever we go, giving attention to one another and to anyone that is speaking to us.
I think like you've been saying, I've begun to think of slightly more good news stories this week of hope, of potential, you know, of people who are committed, you know, to keep fighting for rights, for things, even though it's been going on for so long, such a long history. And I think there's hope in some of these things, and I think that's when we're told all the time, as Phil says, I put that paper up because it's something I don't agree with at all, but I thought it was quite nice and provocative to think about, that we get into this narrative and we sort of serve it as scientists sometimes, you know, without thinking. And doing this with you has made me much more self-aware of these sorts of issues, because it can be very simple that you don't read that literature, you know, you just don't do it, or you don't do it in enough detail to fully understand it. So, as I say, I feel that the platform that I work from now is more solid than it was. I'll leave it at that.